first you got to acknowledge that this happened.
Yep.
Then you say to yourself, how do I deal with it? And then you say, how do I honor my son? And that's what we've been involved with, is to, literally just from day one, we said, Phil was love. He wanted to fill the room with love, fill the world with love.
Welcome to A Place of Yes, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And for me, that was in channeling my grief into good. Welcome to the show. So I am here today with Philip Rabadi, and to be honest, I didn't think about having you as a guest until I was having a conversation with a reporter from the Times-Union. He was mentioning your case, and I said in my head, I was like, I know Shaw. Like, my dad has known him forever. My husband knows him. Why didn't I think of this? And I actually felt sort of foolish because I was like, what a great person to have this conversation with, which is a weird thing to say because the conversation we're going to have is difficult. So Shaw, can you tell my audience, can you share your story?
So where do you begin? Philip was 35 when he was taken away from us. I have 3 children. The boys were very close.
How close were they?
I mean, a couple of years.
Okay.
Growing up, they've never had any closer. They couldn't have gotten any closer. They were best friends. They did everything together. Yeah. From a loss perspective, as a parent, you have different point of view than a child or another child that they lost their friend, their buddy, their confidant.
And the person they were supposed to grow old with and always...
They planned things together. They did things together. Philip got accepted to medical school after high school. He was a smart kid. I read a story from his 5th grade where he was saying, I wanted to be a surgeon. It was one of those projects that the teacher would say,
what do you want to be? Or
what do you want to be? And let's write a book about your story, your life story. And I read that on his memorial. So he always had that passion for that kind of a thing. So the relationship between Brendan and Philip were just an awesome relationship. The sadness I feel is that because, not only lost a son, but now you lost a buddy of your other son.
So Ethan was 5 when Jake passed away, and I don't know how much Ethan always remembers about Jake because he was so young himself.
Right.
But when he was writing his college essay, he talked about moments that he just wished he had with his brother. And I know exactly what you're talking about because there's the loss of your child, which is just the pit in your stomach and the heart-wrenching and just horrible. But then there is this other sadness that accompanies it when you see your living child missing them too. Because what do we do as parents? We just want our kids to really be happy and healthy and feel good. And when you can't fix that, and this is an unfixable loss.
It is an unfixable loss, especially in our situation because they were older. So they have developed
adult friendships.
Adult friendship. When he went to SUNY, he lived with us. Actually, he tried to live on campus for about a year, and then he moved back living with us. And then after graduation, he moved and lived with Brendan.
Oh, okay.
Philip loved to do things with his hands. So he learned how to play guitar, music. He was an excellent carpenter. So he was passionate about everything that he wanted to do. Then he met his wife. They moved in together for a little bit, built a beautiful home in 2021, moved into the home in August 2021, got married on September 10th. The relationship between the 2 boys is that they were planning their lives together. Brendan got married in December, and it was a destination wedding. I never experienced, how full of life Philip was. And then he was taken away from us in April of 2022, on April 13th.
This is going to be difficult, right? I sometimes assume that the audience will know things, and I want to make sure that they do. I'm going to try and do this as delicately as possible, and please jump in. But Philip was brutally murdered.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes my breath away when I think of that loss for you and when I think of what that is. Correct me if I get some of this wrong, but Philip's wife's ex-boyfriend from many years prior, correct?
Like 8+ years.
Yes, like many, many years prior, had some sort of clearly I don't even know what to say. Issues is not a hard enough word, but was stalking and then made it his personal sort of vendetta, right? To
Sure, yeah.
if it kind of the whole if he can't have her, no one can. Was that the sort of thought?
Pretty much, without having to get into the lot of the nitty-gritty
Yes.
aspect of it. He learned of Philip
Yep.
marrying his wife, the ex-girlfriend of this psychopath, almost immediately through social media. So yeah, this gentleman, I call him gentleman because
That's kind of you.
I've called him many different names, which I don't think, is appropriate
Oh,
here.
I hear you.
But was in California. They have shared a dog together. And the reason I want to say that is because it's an important part of the story. And he kept that dog between him and Philip's wife. I don't want to mention her name. To the point that he just wanted to have that connection and
A reason or something to
stay in touch. Then it finally got cut off. He moved to someplace on the East Coast. And the minute he learned of the wedding, sent out an email which was publicly, put out as part of the evidence. It was a lengthy email that talked about psycho personality.
showed the
Then he stalked them from almost first week. He drove up from Virginia, West Virginia, someplace, and stalked them that time, September, December. And I think he probably was there many, many times.
Yeah.
All the evidence was revealed, all kinds of things that pointed to this guy doing everything that's under the sun that you could do to create harm.
It's just unimaginable sometimes, right? Like how horrible humanity can be, and I think you're similar to me in the sense that when you have this loss, right? When you have this sadness with you, like you try to channel it, right? Like you try to find the good in the world or be part of the good. But when there is such ugliness and such horrificness, it's sometimes hard. I think there's a couple things that I just think are fairly remarkable. One is you were there through all of the trial and through everything, right? Like you just, every day, I believe.
Never missed
a day. And it's hard to say, would I have done the same thing? Maybe, I don't know, but I can understand it from a loss perspective, but I also just I just can't imagine having to hear that about someone you love so much, right? And just, how do you make sense of that?
You never do. For me, it was finding the answers of not what happened, but how could it happen? Why did it happen? Why did it happen to my son? I got that phone call to go check on my son because he wasn't responding by phone calls.
Okay.
So I drove to his house.
Okay.
As I was pulling into the driveway, there was another cop's car that just pulled in front of me. And I was on the phone having a great conversation.
Not having any idea what you were going to...
And I'm thinking, and the officer said, by the way, they did a fantastic job. So I, entered into the house. They told me through the garage, and they told me not to go into the house, but to stay out here, which was the garage, 3-bay garage. So I just was wondering to go to that side of the house. And there I found Philip.
So you found him.
I found him. That's a moment where you have absolutely no idea what to do, say, or think.
Process. Yeah.
The world is blank. I saw a body on the ground. It resembled Philip, but it wasn't Philip.
Yeah.
And I wanted that connection to find an answer to what happened, why it happened. From that moment on, I think it was a mission, a journey that I wanted to take, to go through every single thing that I know of, whether it's through the legal process or the criminal process, meaning the people that were doing the investigations, trying to understand what's going on. And of course, now the media basically descended on you as well.
Yeah.
I knew enough that compelled me to find more and ask the right questions of the investigators. Did you look at this? Did you look at that?
Yeah. So you just said something I think that's very powerful. You said that you saw Philip there, but it wasn't Philip, right? And so when you think of Philip, you think of Philip. You think of your incredible son, the carpenter, you think of all of those things.
Right.
I can think of the moment when Jake passed, and it was on my watch, and I can think of that moment. And when I think of Jake and when I think of all of the joy of being his mom, and when I think of those things, I think of all these other things. It's like there's a picture in your head you just can't make go away sometimes. I can answer that question sort of how I think I would, but you still must, like, do you sometimes just feel like you have this picture and you just can't make it go away?
No question about it. For me, you're grieving about a loss, but how do you deal with that? You can never overcome. You can never move on. You can never move forward. For me, it was that image, and no one can erase that from my head. People,
and it's like you're happy other people don't have it, but at the same time, you're alone because you have it.
Until they showed 5 seconds of it during the trial to show, and of course, I'm going bananas. It's a messy situation. When I look at this and I say, okay, this happened. What do you do with all this grief? Some folks basically said, we need therapy. You need to be, seek some help, professional help.
Yep.
Others relied on having family and friends, around them, that inner circle support, which I'm sure you know. Yeah. And you hang on to that. I mean, I read and I researched and I contemplated the idea of sitting in front of professionals and trying to help me through this grief. But, I said, how do you take a picture out of my head? First, you got to acknowledge that this happened.
Yep.
Then you say to yourself, how do I deal with it? And then you say, how do I honor my son? And that's what we've been involved with, is to, literally just from day one, we said, Phil was love. He wanted to fill the room with love, fill the world with love. Our journey really took us from that sad moment, at least for me, I know from my family as well, to, this trial, which was a horrible year and a half of waiting.
No, you didn't miss a day. Did other family members come with you, or were you?
My wife didn't come to any of the things until the end.
Okay.
I saw what I saw. Now I have to deal with it.
See it through,
See it through. And then how do you deal with it from that moment forward?
Yep.
And for me, it's like fact-finding.
Well, I would imagine that is in some ways helpful, right? Because it's almost like that control piece, right? Finding out as much as you can and knowing the facts and doing that, there's some power in that, or there's some control in that, right? Like there's something then that you can do with that.
Yes. And grief is up and down. It goes sideways.
Yep.
You don't have really control over that. Yes, by acknowledging that this happened, you're going to get mad, you're going to get angry, you're going to get confused, you're going to get frustrated because of the sudden, unfathomable situation that you find yourself in.
Do you ever think about the day before, like the day of? Like, because I still 13 years later with Jake think of this, like, and I've said it before on this podcast, it was just a Wednesday. Like, it was just a Wednesday.
Well, ours was a Wednesday too.
Was it?
Yeah. It's unbelievable. And to your point, that Friday before, he just built a house. So he wanted to do everything. I mean, he wanted to do his own thing. On that one Friday, one of my friends and he wanted to build a shed. He said, well, look, why don't we look into these sheds? So that Friday, we drove for like a good 45 minutes to the Amish country.
Okay.
He was sitting in the back, and my friend sat next to me. It was just the laughter. We get to the place, and Philip was like investigating every single little corner, every single little piece of the shed. Coming back, Philip knew that Wednesday, I have a tree company coming down, and they're taking down 10 trees out of my, around the property. And he was supposed to come in and to see which trees he would like to keep. What do you want to do? What time are you going to be here? That was that morning. Okay. And then at about 11:30, that's when I got that one phone call. I was communicating with him about something that he loved, that he wanted to do. I was on a phone that's just a beautiful personality, an international phone call, having such a great time. And then I'm confronted with this vehicle in front of me, and then I find my son. And the worst part of it is Philip's wife comes in. She obviously knew something is wrong. Right. And here we are. It's like two lost souls trying to figure out what's going on. And the worst part of it is for me to call my wife now and to call my son Brendan and to say to them, here's what's happened. I will never forget those moments. Those
calls are impossible.
Yeah, it's like, now you're trying to protect your family as well. I grew up with a larger family. You're taught to not to show your emotions. It's hard for me to do. So I relive those moments, almost daily. A loss is a loss. It's how do we deal with it and how do you try to work through it. When the house was released after the investigations and all that, it wasn't like the next day.
Yeah.
It was
Months.
I
I would
don't
think.
know. Well, actually, it was about within a week or so.
Oh, okay.
The house, after
Oh,
they
for
got
you
him,
to go back
to go
in.
back to
Okay,
the house.
yes.
And they didn't, but I wanted to go. Studently, I took a box and I took some buckets and things because they said, the sheriff's office, we cleaned up everything we can. And I said, fine, but I wanted to be there to say goodbye to my son the way I knew, because from that moment on, I'm not going to see him. And that's something I really regret personally, that I was not able to do. I was actually, in a way, stopped or prevented from doing it. But again, I just wanted to see that thing off.
Try to close it or try
close that moment in my head.
Well, I think it's also it's shock a little bit, right? I think in those first few months you're still in shock though, because I remember moments of you think you've accepted it, but then all of a sudden it would be like, oh, I have to take Jake to therapy or something. Like, do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like Bizarro, because it's like he'd been gone and we hadn't done that for so long.
Yeah, I would call in order to hear his voice.
Like the recording or like the voicemail.
That's one aspect. The other aspect, he helped me around the house, put a pergola up or redo the deck. So I took pictures of him, like looking at me, giving me directions.
When your child thinks they know everything, right? And we're stupid. Yeah.
And he was a great, dad joke teller. In my house, I walk and there's that coffee table that he made. There's that picture that I have next to my bed of him. Or when I walk outside to take the puppies out, I'm walking on that deck that he put together. So
and does that bring you comfort?
It's his presence, right? And I think that's really what's comforting. I kind of occasionally find myself like smiling, but at the same time, tears coming down my eyes.
Like, I think that certainly in the case of Philip and also in the case of Jake, but it's not like they didn't want to leave us. Whatever, it happened. But they still are letting us know that they're there. They're there and they are a part of the family. And while it's not in the very sort of typical traditional sense, they are still there. And
my family, been in this area for almost 40 years. I went to school here, built a house here. From a personal perspective, they went to local schools. They worked in local companies. And my daughter is in theater. Philip was in healthcare. Brendan was in marketing and real estate. So over these decades, we built this network of friendships. At the memorial service, we all stood there. And I think personally, I haven't seen people in decades. And they came from all over the place. I stood there for 4 hours shaking hands and giving hugs to people that I haven't seen or talked with in a while. And that's what we need to look for.
Yes.
As far as talking about a safe place, a place of a yes.
Yeah.
If you can strive to do that every single time you find yourself in that
dark space,
dark space, how do you shed light into that dark place?
You touched on this a little bit when you talked about Philip being full of love and wanting love, and you started a foundation, Fill with Love. And similar to what we tried to do with Jake's Help from Heaven is that it is finding that place of yes. It's taking what we've lost and trying to make the world better in whatever way we can. And also keeping our people at the forefront of not only our memories and our lives, but everyone's lives. So can you talk about Fill with Love? Talk about the foundation.
I think it's the reason that we all need to find a meaning of what that loss is. I've always called Philip. And my goddaughter, obviously from day one, got involved with Albany Medical College because that's where he went to school. And we established a legacy fund for Albany Medical College. By the end of the year, as of today, we have over $100,000 in that legacy fund dedicated for education, dedicated for scholarship, for students that are following the same footsteps as Philip did, which is in the PA program. So while he was working at, Philip was he working at St. Peter's, in 2022, we did our first inaugural golf outing called the Philip Rabadi Memorial Fund, separate than that of the Albany Medical College Legacy Fund. Initially, that funding will be used and partially would be used to name one of the surgical suites in his name. Philip was an excellent carpenter, but he loved to work with his hands. So he was an expert on robotic surgical techniques. That's part of what we're thinking about, to offer a scholarship to students, regardless of where they go. We're honoring Philip's memory, but at the same time, we're helping specific causes that we love and we care about. But as a family, we wanted to do a little bit more. So therefore, we established this philwithlove.org to expand and to go a little bit wider and broader in terms of our ability to honor all these organizations and charities in their good work. And that's the beauty of what it is that means when you're grieving. You know, what do you do with that grief? Grief to me is a hole, and that hole is lacks love, lacks vision, because, you know, your life basically stops.
At that
and then how do you move forward? I talk about it a lot with my friends, and, you know, initially, as you well know, people don't want to ask you anything.
Correct. Yep.
They don't want to bring it up because they don't know how to react. They don't know how you're going to react.
Yep.
To bring up the word Phil or Philip.
Yep.
Then we discovered that philanthropic.
Philanthropic.
Help me out, will you?
Yeah, philanthropic.
It starts with the word Phil.
That's awesome.
So it brings a smile to my face.
I think that's fantastic.
That it's sort of like, it's in front of us, people. And so we fill the world with love.
Part of this podcast and part of these conversations and part of the way you're approaching it is, you know, these were people who are so integral to our lives, and you just don't want to stop talking about it, right? To me, it is more hurtful when people, like, sometimes people are like, oh, I didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to make you sad. As though we're ever not sad, right?
Yeah,
As though,
right.
like you've mentioned it a couple of times, it's always in the forefront of your mind.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So they're like, them asking us about our children is never going to make us sad, right? Like the situation, the fact that they're not here, of course, but that's already there.
Right.
I mean, what a wonderful sign. Philanthropic, Phil. Like, I love that. Of course, you know, and what a way to make it. We sometimes have to be the ones to, like, release the burden of people, like, right? Because they don't know how to say
Absolutely
something or
true.
they don't want to. And we have to make it okay for them. We have to make it sometimes easy for them so that we can talk about our kids. And what a great way to do it, right? Like, I mean, I think you've got a...
Yeah, we have an in.
You have an in, right? I was like, that's awesome. I mean, and I've always thought the name of the foundation, you know, Phil with Love, was just it's clever, right? Having never met Philip, but hearing you talk about him, I can't think of a more fitting name for a foundation with him, because just everything you've said and the way your face lights up and the way you talk about him.
You know, for the audience out there, our kids, our loved ones that have departed, they're part of us, piece of us. You know, whatever loss, you know, yes, it happened, but how do you deal with it? Do things that are impactful in certain way that you care about, that you feel that your loved ones would care about. And the idea that, you know, now that Philip is not here, what would he have done? Deep down in my heart, you know, the way he cared about things, the way he cared about people. So some of the things that, you know, as a family cared about was the domestic violence thing. And that comes from, you know, the origin of the story. And why do we care about animals? Well, that was one of the issues that was part of the story.
Too.
Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of a thing that really is very important for us to share with the audience, is to find that reason.
And I also think it's like we choose to live in a way that will make Jake and Philip proud and live in an honorable way in which we are not only honoring them, but we are moving forward in a good way, right? We want them to know that we are okay also, right? Because I feel very strongly that we have to release that burden from them a little bit, that they don't feel, like, I always, like, you don't want them to feel bad or sad or what happened. Like, it's a weird way to say it, but like...
You know how we struggle by saying things, you know, do you move on? Do you move forward? What do you do? I love music. Philip and my family. So Dave Matthews was one of their great musician, great band that comes to Saratoga
Yes.
here quite a
Yep.
bit. And they've attended, most of their,
Concerts.
concerts. And that year, they were all supposed to go. They did end up going, of course, without Philip. It's Dave Matthews, and I used to kid Philip and Brendan. So when is David Matthews concert is? David Matthews? And they used to say, Dad, it's Dave Matthews. And I said, I want to see a birth certificate.
I think
want
it's
to
David. Yeah.
I want to know what it says. I bet you $1 that it says David.
His parents named him David. Yeah.
Right? I want to see. So I actually put a letter, an email. I don't think I showed it to anybody in my family yet, but to the David Matthew Band's Foundation. And I used half a dozen songs, just the titles of the songs, as part of my email.
Like grief is such a negative, sad word.
Right.
But, and yes, I'm not lightening something that is, I'm not trying to minimize something. But what we do with our loss is what is important, and how we choose to honor and remember. It's exactly what Philip would have wanted, is you remembering that story and sharing the story.
So when I was driving him to his new home, we rented a truck and we pack it and we're moving, like some of the songs from David Matthews.
I will never not call him David Matthews now.
Yes, so you cannot take that out of your head. Right?
I know, now I'm like, oh, it's David Matthews, and people are going to be like, what are you talking
Hopefully,
about?
hopefully he will hear this, and he will connect with us at
He'll
some
let us
point
know,
and say,
yeah.
"My name is Dave." But I was singing for Philip, as he was driving. I will put the song on Bartender, please. I'm not a great singer, but I try. I will kind of encourage him to kind of
Sing along.
because he's stressed out about moving and all this
the whole
stuff, and we'll have that conversation with him. But speaking of songs in general and venues to release that stress a little bit, there's another group of musicians that actually I think about and I use their song, and we struggle with, how do you move on and move forward? And it's very small words, very little words, called let it be. So you let be what it is that you feel and what it is that is important to you, and how and what the reasons are to honor and grieve. Just let it be, let it happen. I find myself confused and unhappy and angry and probably all of it, right? But how do you do that? So, I took it upon myself, just for the audience to know. I want them to really think about that Let It Be song.
Let it be.
So I wrote it down.
Okay.
I'm not going to sing it, okay? I'm just going to read it because I think the words mean a great deal. Some of it, relies on belief and faith and not necessarily religion of any kind, but it's fine, right?
Yep.
So when I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she's standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom. And in this case, I say, he's standing in front of me. When the broken-hearted people, us, live in the world, agree, there will be an answer. I say there may be an answer. There may never be an answer, but you let it be. For though they may be parted, there's still a chance that they will see. How awesome is this? It's like not only they see, we talked about, they feel.
They feel. Well, it's
and they know. It's incredible.
Well, and it's as you're reading the words, I'm like hearing the song in my head.
Right.
And how many times have I heard this song, but I've never stopped. I love that you are doing this because it's so
I
meaningful.
want to do it here for you.
No, it's
and for the audience, because I think the meaning of it, the song itself, is a wonderful song.
It is a wonderful song.
And here's another one. There's still a chance that they will see. There will be an answer. And when the night is cloudy, there's still a light that shines on me. Shines on till tomorrow. Let it be. I wake up to the sound of music. Mother Mary comes to me. who's Mother Mary? Could be mom, could be a son,
Yeah.
could be Jake. Speaking words of wisdom. Let it be.
It's such a great note to, I don't want to say wrap up on, but it's such a great note to end on because it is such a, people want answers or people want more than exists, right?
Yeah,
I think it is let it be, right? Like, and take the time. Like I've said before, like sometimes you just have to be in it. Sometimes you have to listen to it.
I just want to make sure that the audience knows these are not my words. I think it was Paul's words.
I was going to say, it's Paul's voice that's singing in my head right now. Yeah.
Let it be. Okay.
Oh, Shaw, this conversation, I think, has been powerful. I am moved a little bit by the differences in which we have ended up in these seats, but the similarity in which we are moving forward through on whatever that is, right? But the way that we are navigating this life. I'm just so grateful that you are here sharing your story and sharing your family and sharing Philip with us and with the audience of A Place of Yes. But I do think that we've talked about this, the conversations are important, and I'm grateful for you for sharing it with me and with the audience.
I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to share our story because I think there are, like you're saying, a lot of similarities out there. But at the same time, we have to stand together.
Yep.
And we have to cheer ourselves on. Connecting and reaching to each other is exactly what you're doing in your program and your podcast, and you ought to be applauded for that. I really love what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I want to end with this sort of note that is kind of corny, but very true. Like, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me. Like, I'm proud of us, right? And I'm proud because it wasn't that long ago where these losses were not, people didn't talk about them and they didn't use them as catalysts for doing better. And I think the fact that we are doing that is really important and valuable. So cheers to us.
Good stuff.
Cheers to Philip. Cheers to Jake.
Cheers to you.
So we thought we would do this segment at the end where it's sort of Ask Heather Anything. So you got anything for me?
I've known your family for a long time. To me, I'm following your lead, your success of dealing with grief and how you're sharing it with the audience. We're trying our best with everything that we do as it means to us with the Phil, with Love, organizations and the other foundation stuff. And with Jake, help from heaven, is to me, at the time, was such a powerful thing as well, knowing your dad and also knowing Brian over the years. I've never met you before.
I was going to say, I feel like I've known you, but I said to Brian, I was like, I've never actually met him.
So we've never met before, but I admire how much and what you have done is phenomenal. So how did you think that you want to go from that charity foundation thing to that of...
To the podcast.
Let's bring it to the podcast aspect of it. I admire that a lot.
So there's a couple different answers to that, but in a nutshell, the organization to some degree has grown. I don't want to say quicker because it's been 13 years, but I'm a competitive person. Like, it's just a little bit my nature, right? Mm-hmm. So I was very much always of the mindset of like, if we've given away this amount of money, we have to give away more. If we raise this amount, we have to raise more. And I got myself a little bit in this cycle where I had to take a breath and I had to say, okay, at what point is enough? And recognize that the work that we're doing in Jake's memory is super important, but it also has to be sustainable. Mm-hmm. I've learned a lot of lessons. I learned some of them initially through Jake, and then I learned them through these other families and these people. And how can I use this not only for other people to benefit from, but for myself? Like, how can I keep moving forward? That's sort of been a little bit of a theme of our conversation. Like, how do you move forward? And for me, there was this shift of having to take all of these conversations that I was having almost in my head, right? What have I learned, or how can I help someone? Like, how can I be of service to others in this horrible situation? And that really became, a little bit of a calling. Like, I do believe there is an audience of people. It's not just people who've lost children, but people who have, people who just live life, right? Like some of these lessons we talk about are very specific because we've lost a child, but anybody can benefit from them or think about them
and relate to it.
And relate to them.
And it's that lesson that you have learned that you're sharing, which is a very valuable lesson, is the meaning of the lessons that you have learned.
It's like, how do we, how do we get through it and come out the other side? And
right. And I think, just listening to number of your podcasts, really that lesson that I think, that we want to share with our audience is, growing through this period of grief and how you deal with it, and how do you not forget about it, but how do you, again, let it be, let it happen, but you grow with it, and you grow with the idea that you're here to help others as well. And
commonality and just...
And I think that's the important lesson that, your audience would benefit a great deal from, is to sit back, learn, and see, and live the life that your loved one would have wanted you to live.
It's not just my way or your way. It is how, it's different for everybody.
Right.
And I think that is the sort of universal message. Thank you for listening to A Place of Yes. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend, anybody who might benefit from listening to this. It would make a world of difference if we could just reach more people and share the work that we do and the stories we want to tell. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave us a thumbs up or leave us a comment. We would appreciate all that you can do. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend or two.